In Denmark, reservists were urgently called up for duty due to the detection of Russian drones in the country's airspace. Civilians who previously served in the Danish army have been asked to report for military service as soon as possible. European Union countries will hold a crucial summit in Copenhagen in the coming days to discuss how Europe should respond to Russian military provocations. And here the Europeans' positions differ. Some argue it's time to shoot down any Russian aircraft that illegally enter NATO countries. Others, like Finnish President Alexander Stubb, insist that there's no need to shoot anything down, but rather to show patience and simply escort Russian planes in their airspace. And while Europe is debating like this, Denmark is urgently calling up reservists, and in Sweden they have suddenly started talking publicly about developing nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons amid Russian threats. In Sweden, debates have flared up about whether Sweden should make a new attempt to acquire a nuclear bomb on its own, or together with its NATO allies. I'll give you a spoiler. Sweden almost acquired nuclear weapons during the Cold War, so it's possible that certain developments might have remained. My name is Alexei Peci, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I want to remind you that on this YouTube channel, several news analysis videos about events around the world are released every day, so that you can stay up to date with absolutely all the news. That's why I recommend you subscribe to this YouTube channel, give it a like, and please write a long, detailed comment under this episode. It really helps promote the video on YouTube. In addition, I recommend subscribing to my Telegram channel, Peci News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, there are several news stories from Europe about how the European Union is ready to respond to Russia's military provocations. In Denmark, reservists were urgently called up for service after Russian drones were detected in the country's airspace, which are increasingly spying on Denmark's military facilities. Civilians who previously served in the Danish army have been asked to report for military service as soon as possible. It is noted that the incidents occurred shortly before the European Union summits, which will take place in Copenhagen. Even the former chief analyst at the Danish Military Intelligence Service, Jacob Kaspo, stated that such an urgent call-up of reservists is unusual. And it shows that the country is in a truly extraordinary situation that requires emergency measures. He linked the call-up of reservists to the upcoming European Union summit, which will take place in Copenhagen on October 1. And let me remind you that in recent weeks, Russian drones have been spotted several times in the skies over Denmark, including over the kingdom's largest airbase and several airports. In Copenhagen, this led to the temporary suspension of civilian flights. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called the incident the most serious attack on Denmark's critical infrastructure and announced that an investigation is underway. On September 28, Danish authorities banned civilian drones from their airspace. Until October 3, they explained this as a security measure ahead of the European Union summit in Copenhagen. It was also stated that if someone launches drones, they could even face prison time for it. Against this backdrop, Germany, France and Sweden sent military aid to Denmark, including troops, anti-drone equipment and radar systems. And NATO sent the German frigate Hamburg to the shores of the kingdom. It's important to note these are Russian provocations. Russia in Europe and the somewhat detached position of United States President Donald Trump on this issue are still pushing the European Union to take action. That is why on October 1st an informal summit of European Union leaders will be held in Copenhagen, where a new defense strategy will be discussed. It is expected that at the summit, which has already been dubbed the European Union's Military Capabilities Summit, they will discuss the creation of a drone wall for detection, tracking and destruction. Russian drones as well as projects for rapid response to aircraft intrusions into European airspace. But, while it's easy to acknowledge the risk coming from Moscow, it's much more difficult to agree on how to respond within the European Union, which is divided by such conflicting priorities. Some say we need to shoot down Russian planes, while others say, are you crazy? Absolutely not. That's escalation. NATO has stated that they are preparing to strengthen the rules of engagement for the use of force against Russia. We're talking about moving from a patrol mission to a full-fledged air defense system. This will allow them to shoot down Russian intruder aircraft. Currently, airspace patrol squadrons are primarily tasked with escorting Russian military planes that violate Allied airspace, except in cases where they pose a clear military threat. How to determine that remains unclear. So, in other words, NATO says that for now, if, for example, a Russian plane enters Estonia, the patrol squadron's task is simply to escort that plane. And to say, you can't be here, leave now. Although, let me remind you, the MiG-31S that entered Estonian airspace are actually carriers of Kinzhal missiles. How can you identify whether it will launch that missile or not? Now the alliance says it's time to shoot down Russian planes instead of escorting them. If it enters the airspace, one warning: if there's no response, shoot it down. Let me remind you that Russian planes were in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. That's quite a long time. But the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, said that he personally would not give the order to shoot down Russian planes even if they enter Finnish airspace. He said it's better to stay silent to avoid conflict. It's better to escort them, ask the Russians to leave, and so on. And so it will be difficult for the European Union leaders in Copenhagen to find a balance between deterring Russia and real war, considering Donald Trump's position. Because Trump is basically saying that NATO should shoot down Russian planes. But whether I will support you in this is unknown. Here, I will note that in private conversations, European officials today are essentially warning about the risk of a Ferdinand moment. A Ferdinand moment is when a sudden escalation can drag the continent into war, as happened after the assassination of the Archduke in 1914. Many people are currently discussing this in the corridors of the European Council. Listen, maybe we need to act carefully so that a Ferdinand moment doesn't happen. With Europe's instability, Sweden has chosen to act independently and move forward. Due to concerns and threats from Russia, Sweden has started discussing the creation of its own nuclear weapons. There is a heated debate in the country about whether Sweden should make a new attempt to acquire a nuclear bomb, either alone or together with its NATO allies. Jimmy Åkesson, leader of the right-wing Sweden Democrats, who support the ruling coalition relies on, was among the first to show interest in this idea. Next, Robert Dalsho is a researcher at the National Defense Research Institute of Finland. He suggested discussing the creation of their own nuclear weapons with Swedish components. This same point of view is shared by Alice Teodorescu-Mave, a member of the European Parliament from the center-right Christian Democrats Party, which is part of the government. She believes that Sweden should play its role in the European nuclear weapons strategy. It should also obtain nuclear weapons and become a nuclear power. And here I would like to remind you that such discussions have a basis. Sweden secretly ran its own nuclear program for decades during the Cold War, when it was neutral. After 1945, Sweden actively studied the use of United States nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Later, 3 years later, the chief of the Swedish Defense Staff ordered a study on producing a plutonium-based bomb. In 1956 and 1957, Sweden secretly detonated powerful bombs in Lapland. As a result, if you know the history, Lake Fuahore was formed. And so, the simulation of nuclear explosions was carried out as part of preparations for the National Nuclear Weapons Development Program. That is, Sweden was very serious about it. Sweden was successfully moving toward producing nuclear weapons. Uranium had already been mined in the country, and 2 nuclear reactors were built to produce plutonium. And by 1957, the CIA concluded that Sweden had a sufficiently advanced nuclear program, allowing it to produce weapons within 5 years. In the mid-60s, when the country was estimated to be only 6 months away from creating a nuclear bomb, the project began to fade. Because of the anti-nuclear public movement, because of the enormous expenses, but most importantly because of secret security guarantees from the United States of America. And now the Swedes are talking about reviving their nuclear arsenal. More specifically, this is a second attempt to create it. And when such conversations start, it suggests that, well, there is a certain, perhaps, distrust toward the current United States of America, and a reliance only on their own strength. Well, as they say, with its aggression, Russia might end up creating a big porcupine right at its own borders. Putin's plan is working as intended. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.